Welcome. Here's wishing all of you a very happy Independence Day. As we turn 75 as a nation, it is a day to look back at what we have achieved and what comes next. This year is being celebrated with even more fervor as we mark an important milestone in our journey. But as we look back with pride, we also need to look forward. What does India need to prioritize if we want to achieve our goals in the next 25 years? What is India at 100 going to look like? What are our goals, ambitions, and what are our challenges? The tone and tenor on this was in a way set today by the Prime Minister during his speech. He was speaking from the ramparts of the Red Fort. He spoke about his vision for India, but also spoke specifically about two challenges: corruption and nepotism. Listen in.
भारत जैसे लोकतंत्र में जहां लोग गरीबी से जूझ रहे हैं, जब एक तरफ से देखते हैं कि एक तरफ वो लोग हैं जिनके पास रहने के लिए जगह नहीं है, दूसरी तरफ वो तरह लोग हैं जिनको अपना चोरी किया हुआ माल रखने के लिए जगह नहीं है। ये स्थिति अच्छी नहीं है और इसलिए हमें भ्रष्टाचार के खिलाफ पूरी ताकत से लड़ना है। पिछले 8 वर्षों में डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर के द्वारा आधार, मोबाइल, इन सारे आधुनिक व्यवस्थाओं का उपयोग करते हुए 2 लाख करोड़ रुपए जो गलत हाथों में जाते थे, उसको बचा करके देश की भलाई के लिए काम लगाने में हम सफल हुए हैं। जो लोग पिछली सरकारों में बैंकों को लूट लूट करके भाग गए, उनकी संपत्तियां जब्त कर करके वापस लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। कईयों को जेलों में जीने के लिए मजबूर करके रखा हुआ है। हमारी कोशिश है जिन्होंने देश को लूटा है उनको लौटाना पड़े, वो स्थिति हम पैदा करेंगे। भाई भतीजावाद, और जब मैं भाई भतीजावाद, परिवारवाद की बात करता हूं तो लोगों को लगता है मैं सिर्फ राजनीतिक क्षेत्र की बात करता हूं। जी नहीं, दुर्भाग्य से राजनीतिक क्षेत्र की उस बुराई ने हिंदुस्तान की हर संस्थाओं में परिवारवाद को पोषित कर दिया है। परिवारवाद हमारी अनेक संस्थाओं को अपने में लपेटे हुए है और उसके कारण मेरे देश की टैलेंट को नुकसान होता है, मेरे देश के सामर्थ्य को नुकसान होता है। जिनके पास अवसर की संभावनाएं हैं वो परिवारवाद, भाई भतीजे के बाद बाहर रह जाता है। भ्रष्टाचार का भी कारण ये भी एक बन जाता है ताकि उसका कोई भाई भतीजे के कार्य आसरा नहीं है तो लगता है चलो भाई कहीं से खरीद करके क्या जगह बना लूं। इस परिवारवाद से, भाई भतीजावाद से हमें हर संस्थाओं में एक नफरत पैदा करनी पड़ी होगी, जागरूकता पैदा करनी होगी, तब हम हमारी संस्थाओं को बचा पाएंगे।
Now, the Prime Minister's speech on Independence Day is often an opportunity to look back at achievements of the government, where the country is headed, and maybe, announce new policy measures. The use of this speech to speak about nepotism and corruption, which are essentially or often political issues, is quite interesting. And we're going to be breaking down this aspect and much more, unpacking much more on the show today. Mythili Bhusnurmath, consulting editor, ET Now, with me on the show. Yamini Aiyar, President, Center for Policy Research, joining us today, as is Madhavan, Narayan, senior journalist. Welcome to all of you. Wish you all a very happy Independence Day. Yamini, let me begin with your take on the Prime Minister's speech, and especially the mention of corruption and nepotism. And remember, when he spoke about nepotism, he said it's not just about politics. He related it to the performance of India in the CWG recently, saying that because there's no longer nepotism and merit-based selection of sports people, we're doing much better. How do you see this? I can't hear you, Yamini. I think you're on mute.
Apologies. A very happy Independence Day to you and to all your viewers. It's an important day and one of somber reflection and forward-looking. I think the Prime Minister has most certainly touched on a topic that's at the nub of much of the challenges of society in India. The challenge of corruption that he mentioned is certainly not new. It's been part and parcel of our public life and our social life for many decades now, and speaks to much of the rot in our society. India has struggled towards meritocracy, and he's right in that nepotism and corruption are part of the challenge that makes meritocracy difficult. But I think those are easy arguments to make. And in a moment of serious reflection, we really need to look back and ask ourselves what kinds of institutions we've built for this country, where are we on that path to progress, what kinds of value systems have we built in terms of the imagination of our constitution to where we are today, and in what way is our political class and our political leaders actually epitomizing and symbolic of those values that shape much of our society today. And in my view, on each of these metrics, we haven't done very well. If you look back to the 1950s and 60s, we certainly embarked on a project of building strong, robust elite institutions, many of which stay today as part of the grand story of India's achievements at 75, the IITs, the IIMs, institutions of science. Even particularly in the 50s and 60s, all of this was part of building a robust university system. But look at where we are today. We haven't done very well. In fact, I would go so far as to say we've grossly failed when it comes to mass education and providing high quality primary and upper primary schooling to most of our children. 50% of children who finish 5 years of schooling today still can barely read a standard 2 textbook. The reason why we don't have meritocratic systems in India is not so much a challenge of nepotism alone. It is a challenge of the fact that we never really invested in our base. Whilst we failed to invest in our base, we've also allowed much of our higher education universities to completely atrophy. Bureaucratic interference, administrative narrow-mindedness, the loss of scientific temper. These are the reasons why today nepotism alongside with failed institutions make it hard for every Indian to succeed. The reason why our sporting facilities are doing well is not so much about nepotism as much as the fact that we actually invested in some of these institutions. Having invested in these institutions, we've created a possibility of a pipeline for the young to aspire and to achieve their best potential. It is this failure that we should be talking about today, not putting them into these broad sweeping statements just of nepotism and corruption, which make for nice speeches, but really don't get to the hard challenge of institution building.
Right.
A second issue that I'll quickly touch on, I know you have to move on, just on constitutional values. If we actually held true to those values of equity, of justice, of inclusion, perhaps we wouldn't be talking about corruption and nepotism today. That's the reflection we need to have as we look forward.
I think it's important to also talk about why the choice of these two endemic issues. I mean, there are several issues that you can talk about as a challenge for a nation as large as ours, with a democratic history as rich as ours. But the timing and the mention of these two issues, Mythili, do you think it would be fair to say that these are two very important impediments we have to achieve goals that the country has set for itself?
Tamanna, and a very happy Independence Day to you, to my fellow panelists, and also to our viewers. The reason why I think the Prime Minister focused on these is this has been endemic to India. But I would look at nepotism as a kind of corruption. And if you look at it that way, I think we've come a long, long way from the license permit Raj days, when I think corruption, nepotism, etc. was far, far more. You got a license only if you were somebody, you were connected to somebody. The reason why this is gone is because we kind of embarked on reform. We no longer have a license permit Raj. Technology has made it possible to become much more transparent, much less opaque. So has corruption disappeared? Has nepotism disappeared? No. And it is unlikely to ever disappear. But it certainly has come down. And for me, as I look back on India at 75 years, is that, you look at it as a glass either half full or half empty. I would like to look at it as half full, with the empty portion becoming less and less. and not in another 75 years, but in maybe 10, 15 years as technology and market reforms in an inclusive democracy really take root. So I'm extremely heartened, and I think much less pessimistic than Yamini, that I think we have arrived a long, long way. Of course, we have much more to go, but remember what we're trying to do. Look at the odds against us when we started in 1947. Nobody gave us a chance, but we've survived. We survived as a nation. We've done well. Our GDP has increased 30 times, per capita GDP 8 times. The data is all there before us. But should we get complacent? No. But I think we need to look back with justifiable pride and gird up our loins to decide, yes, we need to do much more and we can do it.
Absolutely. I mean, in 1947, the average life expectancy of an Indian was some 32 years. So we have come a long way. And half full, half empty aside, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't feel great pride in, what we've achieved as a nation. You're right. Nobody gave us a chance. Such a diverse nation. How are you going to stick together under one flag? And we've managed to do that. But Madhavan, I want to come to you. And of course, happy Independence Day to you and all of our viewers once again. On the timing of these two issues, it comes right after the Bihar upset, the big Bihar political upset. It comes, of course, when, the Prime Minister speaks about such levels of corruption that there's no place to keep all that looted money. One immediately thinks of that picture coming in from Kolkata, where, a TMC leader's aide's house was raided and there were stacks of cash. So are all of those subliminal messages also being given out with the speech?
Tamanna, happy Independence Day, and thank you for asking that question, because we need to deconstruct it very systematically. I think your question is an apt one. Yes, there is no doubt that there was a political message, because the imagery that the Prime Minister gave was clearly of Parivarwad or family-run parties, whether it's Lalu Yadav's RJD or MK Stalin's DMK or, Samajwadi Party. There was nothing left to our imagination the way he portrayed the whole thing. But let me ask a very interesting question, which is that while, it's good that the Prime Minister mentioned that nepotism and dynasty is not just to politics, but in other spheres of life also. So I'd like to stretch the logic to see if there are business dynasties that also need to be questioned. But having said that, let me state one fact and state another and try to connect the dots. First is that India's rank in the Human Development Index is 131, which is way low. So when the Prime Minister talks about developed India, he should obviously be looking at jumping 100 ranks in from say 131 to 31, because that's only when we could achieve things in Human Development Index. Politically speaking, the big, what I call the democracy paradox, has been that the so-called family-run parties and dynastic parties have been at the forefront of welfare economics. So India has, you just mentioned an average life expectancy of only 32 when India became independent. Look at the expectancy now. Look at the literacy level, and let's also look at the fact that from absolute poverty of 60% of the population, we have gone to abolishing extreme poverty to a good extent. Therefore, I often like to say India has evolved from misery to poverty. The current poverty is nothing compared to what it was during independence. So we need to ask, why is it that family-controlled dynastic parties are doing well in elections, in spite of what the Prime Minister rightly said was conviction of certain leaders? He said, Mahimaye gayi ja rahi hain. So, the praises are being sung to those who have even been convicted of corruption. Why is that so? That's because populism of a certain welfarist kind seems to be working in a poverty-stricken country in which people are aspiring to coming above based on basic needs. And that is something we need to keep in mind. If we were to do away with nepotism, the corruption, the elimination of corruption and the resources generated by it should not be spent on jingoistic showcase projects, but on something that actually improves India's rank in the Human Development Index. Let me also point out that the Transparency International ranks India at 85 among 130 countries in corruption. Therefore, there's a huge way to go in conquering that milestone. And as Yamini Aiyar rightly mentioned, there are lots of issues related to institutions and processes that will not be easily fixed by a nice red fort speech. We need to look at what are the
The
institutional...
speech happens every year, Madhavan. No one is saying that the speech is going to fix the problems. I'm interested in knowing why the mention of these things in the speech. I mean, because traditionally the speech, especially Prime Minister Modi's speech, is a lot about big picture. Setting the stage for the next 5, 7, 10 years.
Absolutely. Let me say that he is very clear about one thing, that his political opponents are essentially mostly from family-controlled or family-generated parties, whether it's the YSR Congress, whether it's, Naveen Patnaik's Biju Janata Dal, they're all having some family roots. So he's very clearly packaging a political message within what seems like a statesmanly speech.
Okay.
I mean, it's a good visionary speech, let me admit that. But you have to read between the lines. You have to understand that he's attacking dynasties because that is one way of ensuring that there is a big USP for BJP, which is a party organized on ideological lines. We can question the ideology. But the question is, this is a political speech, but beautifully couched and very well articulated in visionary, statesmanly idioms.
I think if I now move from, of course, this was the political part of it, but also in terms of vision laid down, one thing that struck me, Mythili, and please tell me what were the key highlights for you, but one thing that definitely struck me was when the Prime Minister said that over the next 25 years, we now need to become a developed nation. No more of this developing nation. And I think that was a very crucial message, which at least I caught on to, because in all of these, the way you speak about the country or understand the country, and in the 75 years, you're right, we've achieved great things. But we're still in that developing nation category. We need to move out of that. We need that orbit out of that. And do you think that there is a clear plan in which you can see to really back that statement?
The Prime Minister is very good at spelling out these big visionary ideas, whether it was a 5 trillion economy, whether India is a developed nation, etc. But remember, Tamanna, it's not an easy task. We are talking about a nation that is perhaps the most diverse, many rainbows, not just one rainbow in this country. And we are a democracy. When you compare ourselves with China, one completely forgets that the political system is so completely different. So one has to handle not just, I'm not talking about this government, successive governments. If you look around the subcontinent and you see what's happened in all the other countries around us, one has to accept that we have survived, and as a democracy, of course we're not a perfect democracy, but which is a perfect democracy? Show me one which is perfect. So to say that India will easily become a developed economy, no. Whether it will happen in the next 25 years, I hope so. But we must remember that we move from a lower income country to a lower middle income country, and that's not been easy to do. So it is a process, and we also want it to be inclusive. We're very sure we want it to remain a democracy where nothing is thrust down our throat. So that becomes very much more difficult to achieve. So it will happen, but maybe not over the next 10 years, 15 years. Hopefully, but to my mind, Tamanna, the biggest challenge, I think, is something that perhaps most people have not touched upon, is the fact that sometime in the next few years, we will have to do the delimitation of seats to the Lok Sabha. We're stuck at that 543 seats based on the 1971 census. The population the distribution has changed dramatically. If we do the delimitation as we should, political power will shift even more to the north and the east, whereas the economic power even today is concentrated in the west and the south. This imbalance between political and economic power is going to create a great deal of fissure in the country. And that, I think, is going to be our biggest challenge. How do we do that? If we are able to overcome that, I think the sky is the limit.
That's an interesting point, and you're right, it's not really been front and center yet. Talking about big vision, and of course it takes time to achieve these things, but in terms of a 5-year trajectory, these were some of the things that this government promised would happen by 2022. This includes India's GDP growth rate being at 9 to 10%, every Indian having a bank account, life insurance, accident insurance, pension, and a house. Farmers' incomes were to be doubled by 2022. Manual scavenging was to have ended by 2022. India was to be free of malnutrition. The female labor force participation rate was to be 30%. It's 20% right now. It's actually dipped in the last few years. So, Yamini, there is a long way to go, no doubt. But in your view, what should be the priority at this point?
I think three things. I agree with Mythili and Madhav that it's an important moment for us also to remember what we have achieved. And for me, I think our biggest achievement is the fact that we defied the globe's expectations of surviving as a democracy. We have, not only have we survived as a democracy, I think we've thrived as a democracy, at least in terms of our ability to ensure that we are a robust electoral democracy. The challenge has been, and it's become, and I think it became more acute, especially after the 1990s, as we saw the economy being liberated and growing, has been of ensuring substantive social and economic freedoms to all Indians, particularly at the bottom of the pyramid. That remains today an extremely significant challenge. And if we are to move down the path of going from, as the Prime Minister said, a developing nation to a developed nation, these are nice political speeches, but it really is about ensuring substantive economic and social freedoms to all of India. That means that I think, number one, most importantly, we need to invest in the institutions of democracy. Our local governments have been long ignored, but you cannot have a robust state, a robust democracy and a robust public service delivery system without strong and robust local governments. It means, secondly, that we need to invest, it's linked to local governments, in the ability of the state to provide high quality health and education. I've been looking back at some of our policy documents from the 1950s and 60s, and the honest truth is that we've been saying exactly the same thing now for the last now 75 years. In 1946, the Bhore Commission said that we need to invest in a robust network of high quality primary health systems. In 1966, the Kothari Commission pushed hard for universalization of education. We've been talking about the challenge of quality education since then as well. Yet these are unfulfilled, incomplete ambitions that lie at the heart of being able to ensure that all Indians have substantive economic freedoms. So building the capacity of the state to actually do these crucial 19th century almost roles that states ought to fulfill remains critical. And last, none of this is going to be possible if we don't hold on to the core of what it means to be Indian, which is to be to have a belief in the values of our constitution, to believe in our diversity, in pluralism, in secularism, and ensure social cohesion. You can have no development if you end up in a corrosive society that is at war with one another. The pride of India is in our ability to live together to ensure that we have substantive freedoms for all, which is an institutional and economic challenge that we need to confront as well.
About it, I mean, they'd written us off, right? That how can a country which speaks so many languages, has so many religions coexisting, come together? And there, I think there is no doubt, there's no half empty, half full. We've definitely achieved that. We're still standing here very much strong. Madhavan, your sort of top priority as we look forward, as we look to the next 25 years, would you say it is growth, but without the wide gap we have, the extent of inequality we have in growth, where even today we're talking about malnutrition, where some of the top richest people in the world also live in India. We create massive amounts of wealth. We have some of the best facilities in the world, but it's not for everyone. And I think that's one of the big problems we need to address.
Absolutely. Tamanna, let me tell you, one of my favorite examples is always Sherlock Holmes. In one of his stories, there is the clue about the dog that did not bark. And that's a clue. So in India, what is the dog that does not bark in the development debate? It is the Gini coefficient, which measures the inequality in the economy. And I was looking for the data last week and I couldn't find it. There is 10-year-old data from World Bank. And we barely have any economic research on the levels of inequality in the society, while anecdotally it is staring us in the face, whether you're looking at the Merrill Lynch list of millionaires, dollar millionaires, or Goldman Sachs, or whatever. It's there in the market narrative with the sales of Audi and BMW doing better, while the Tata Nano failed as a product, which is symbolic of what is going on in India today. That there is gross inequality, and that has to be addressed. That is linked to the nepotism that the Prime Minister speaks of and the corruption he speaks of. But how do we actually do that, get to the next level? That is by actually measuring and acknowledging that there is an immorality to gross inequality And it's not just about corruption, it's also about, well, not old-fashioned communist-style redistribution or nationalization, but we need a sense of justice in the way we do things to reduce inequalities. And Yamini pointed out the role of the state in health and education. And let me say, the current government's priorities is heavily weighed towards treating the private sector as an engine of growth. We need to ask, can the private sector deliver goals on health and education which are enablers for reducing inequality? These are the questions that we need to ask. It's great to talk about diversity. We are doing very well on gender diversity, increasingly in everything from sports to boardrooms to, of late, even CSIR. But we need to ask questions talking
We're
about
actually not doing great on female participation in the workforce.
Yeah, it's relative.
We're doing quite badly.
But I'm also talking about the fact that there are backwardness based on caste and other forms of inequities. We need to integrate that with the economic process, at least to create sufficient growth which percolates down, because new technologies as well as institutional mechanisms are not automatically geared to reduce inequalities, which is why the state as an enabler of health and education becomes a very important part of the future agenda that we need to look at. Let me also just add one bit about the slogan that the Prime Minister had on Jai Anusandhan today, which is very good because it sounds very great, but look at the fact that India ranks 10th in the world in trademark index and 8th in trademark index and 10th in patent indexes. But yet our ranks in human development is low, our Transparency International rank is low. Ask yourself why. It is because we have C-grade patents and B-grade trademarks. We need to gear our research. Most of our pharmaceutical and IT successes are based on global services or copycat research. We need to have world-class quality. We need to have world-class research that is both efficient as well as strong in leadership on things like algorithms. Maybe emerging paradigms like blockchain or other technologies like, maybe not drones, but maybe at a futuristic truck discovery, we do stand a chance. But we need to connect it all with the masses. Are we doing that? We are not, I'm afraid. I'd like to err on the side of pessimism here.
All right, but let's, maybe we are when it comes to the digital spread and the way, I would say, digital payments have taken off. That's one use of technology which has, I think, surprised everyone with its wide adoption. But we have run out of time. We can speak endlessly about what this country has achieved and what we need to achieve going further. I think there's no doubt that everyone is really proud of where we stand today, and we look forward with hope in our hearts. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today on this very, very special broadcast.
Thank you.